Lonely rancher found a young Apache girl hanging on a tree with a sign, "White man don't forgive." The desert morning stretched endlessly before William Hayes as he rode his gray mare, Belle, through the familiar landscape of sage and sand. At 35, he had spent most of his adult life on this remote Arizona ranch, inheriting both the land and the profound solitude that came with it. The early sun painted the distant mesas in shades of amber and burnished gold, and the only sounds were the gentle, rhythmic clip-clop of his horse's hooves and the eternal whisper of wind through the scattered mesquite trees. It was then, in that moment of perfect desert stillness, that he saw her beneath the ancient cottonwood tree that had marked the eastern boundary of his property for as long as anyone could remember, stood a young Native American woman. Her slender arms were raised above her head, bound securely to a thick branch, and her traditional fringed dress caught the morning light like spun bronze and copper. She couldn't have been more than 28, William thought, and the sight of her there made him pull up short on his horse, his heart suddenly beating faster with concern and confusion. A weathered wooden sign hung from the tree trunk like a scar, its crude black letters spelling out words that hit him like a physical blow, "White man don't forgive." William sat motionless in his saddle for a long moment, feeling the weight of untold history settle around him like the ever-present desert dust. He had heard fragments of the old stories, pieces passed down through generations of ranchers and settlers, whispered conversations that stopped when children entered the room. But he had never imagined that those distant echoes of conflict would reach across the decades to touch his own quiet life. Dismounting slowly, his worn leather boots touching the sandy earth with deliberate care, he approached with measured steps. The soft crunch of his footsteps seemed loud in the vast silence. As he drew closer, he could see the steady rise and fall of the woman's chest beneath her traditional dress. She was very much alive, though whether she was sleeping, praying, or in some kind of meditative trance, he couldn't determine. "Miss," he called out gently, his voice carrying easily in the crisp desert air. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Her eyes opened then, dark and deep as midnight pools reflecting starlight, and she looked at him without the slightest trace of surprise. There was no fear in her steady gaze, only a profound sadness that seemed to echo across generations, carrying the weight of countless untold stories. "I am Erica," she said, her voice soft but clear as mountain water. "Erica Nage. I hang here for the sins of my ancestors, and for the sins of yours." William removed his weathered cowboy hat, suddenly feeling small and insignificant beneath the vast, endless desert sky. The morning breeze stirred his brown hair as he struggled to find the right words. "My name is William Hayes. This ranch, this land belongs to me now, but I suspect it belonged to someone else long before my family ever set foot here." Erica studied his face with the careful attention of someone reading the landscape of his character, searching for something in his expression. "Your great-grandfather was Thomas Hayes," she said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement. A fact delivered with quiet certainty. William's breath caught in his throat like dust. He knew that name from old family stories, though the details had always been frustratingly vague, as if certain chapters of family history had been deliberately left unwritten. "Yes, he was." "How did you know that?" "Because my great-grandfather was Chief Nate of the Apache," Erica replied, her dark gaze drifting toward the distant purple mountains that rose like ancient guardians from the desert floor. "In the autumn of 1885, your great-grandfather Thomas Hayes led a group of armed settlers who accused my people of stealing cattle from the local ranches. They hanged 3 Apache men from this very tree, including my great-grandfather's younger brother, a man called Running Bear who had never stolen so much as a handful of corn in his entire life." The words hit William like stones thrown into still water, creating ever-widening ripples of understanding and horror that spread through his consciousness. He had always wondered why there were such obvious gaps in the family stories, why certain chapters seemed to have been deliberately forgotten, why his grandfather had always grown quiet and distant whenever the subject of the early ranch days came up. I'm sorry, William said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being, every beat of his heart. I'm truly, deeply sorry for what my family did. For what my great-grandfather did. Being sorry cannot bring back the dead, Erica said quietly, her voice carrying no anger, only a weariness that seemed older than her 28 years. But perhaps genuine sorrow can prevent the living from carrying forward the poison of old wounds, generation after generation. William looked up at the expertly tied ropes that bound her slender wrists to the branch above. The knots were complex, clearly the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. You did this to yourself, didn't you? I came here to honor my ancestors, Erica explained, her voice steady and resolved. To hang as they hung, to suffer as they suffered, until the spirits told me that the ancient debt was finally balanced. I have been here since sunrise yesterday, taking only small sips of water, waiting for a sign that justice has been properly served. William felt something shift deep in his chest, a stirring he hadn't experienced in the 3 long years since his wife Sarah had passed away from cancer. It was the half-forgotten feeling of being truly needed, of having a purpose beyond the endless daily routine of tending cattle, mending fences, and eating solitary meals in an empty house. This isn't justice, he said gently, his voice full of conviction. This is just more suffering piled on top of suffering that's already far too heavy for anyone to bear. Erica's penetrating eyes found his again, searching his face. You speak like someone who knows something about carrying heavy burdens. William nodded slowly, feeling the familiar ache of loss. I lost my wife 3 years ago. Cancer took her, slowly and painfully. For the longest time afterward, I thought the pain I felt was what I owed her, that carrying that grief was the only way to properly honor what we had shared together. But I've learned that pain isn't the same thing Ashenur. And suffering by itself isn't justice. He walked deliberately to his leather saddlebag and retrieved his sharp knife, its blade glinting in the morning sun. May I cut you down? He asked, gesturing respectfully toward the ropes. Please? Erica watched him with curiosity rather than alarm, tilting her head slightly. Why would you free me? Your people and mine, we have been enemies for so many generations. The wounds run deep. Because I choose not to be my great-grandfather, William said with quiet firmness. And maybe, if you'll let yourself, you can choose not to be bound by what your great-grandfather suffered. With careful, deliberate strokes, he cut through the ropes that had held her captive. Erica's feet touched the sandy ground gently, and she rubbed her wrists where the rough rope had left angry red marks on her brown skin. For a long moment, they stood facing each other in the vast, profound silence of the desert morning, 2 people separated by generations of history but somehow connected by something deeper and more powerful than old grievances and ancient hurts. Where will you go now? William asked, genuinely concerned. Erica looked toward the distant horizon, then back at his kind face. I honestly don't know. My family, they don't always understand my need to honor the old ways, to remember what was done to our people. And the old ways themselves seem to have no place in this modern world. William considered this carefully, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years. The ranch house had felt so empty since Sarah's death, with too many unused rooms and too much silence. I have a ranch house with more rooms than one man could ever need, he said carefully, not wanting to presuming too much. And I could honestly use help with the horses. They seem to respond much better to gentle hands than to rough ones. You would actually trust me? Erica asked, surprise coloring her voice. After everything you've just learned about our family's shared history? Trust has to start somewhere, William replied with a slight smile. And I figure if you were planning to harm me, you probably wouldn't have spent the last day and a half hanging from a tree trying to balance some cosmic scale of justice. For the first time since he'd found her, Erica smiled, a small, tentative expression that completely transformed her entire face, bringing light to her dark eyes. Perhaps the spirits did send me a sign after all, just not the one I was expecting. Over the following weeks, as summer slowly gave way to autumn, Erica became naturally woven into the daily fabric of life at the ranch. She possessed an almost mystical connection with the horses, speaking to them in a musical mixture of Apache and English, calming even the most skittish animals with traditional songs her grandmother had taught her when she was just a small child. William found himself genuinely looking forward to their evening conversations on the wraparound porch, where she would share beautiful stories of her people's traditions and he would talk about his dreams for expanding the ranch and the new life he was slowly, carefully learning to rebuild from the ashes of his grief. You loved her very much, Erica observed one particularly beautiful evening as they sat watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the endless sky in brilliant shades of rose and deep purple. I did love her, William said simply, his voice soft with memory. For 8 wonderful years, she was my entire world, my best friend, my everything. When she died, I honestly thought my world had died right along with her. But it didn't die, Erica said gently, wisdom beyond her years evident in her quiet voice. Your world just took on a different shape, became something new. William looked at her with growing admiration, struck by the profound wisdom in her simple words. Is that what you think happened to our great-grandfathers all those years ago? Their world changed shape so drastically, and they simply didn't know how to live in it anymore. Perhaps, Erica said thoughtfully, gazing at the first stars beginning to appear. Fear makes people do terrible, unforgivable things. And when everything you've ever known is changing rapidly around you, there's so very much to be afraid of. As autumn painted the desert landscape in deeper golds and rich reds, William realized with growing wonder that the hollow ache in his chest, the one that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death, had begun to fill with something he had thought was gone forever. Not just hope for the future, but genuine joy in the present moment. Real joy, the kind that comes from sharing daily experiences with someone who truly understands both profound sorrow and the slow, patient work of healing. Erica had begun to laugh more often, a sound like clear water flowing over smooth stones that seemed to bring new life to every corner of the ranch. She taught William the Apache names for the plants and animals that surrounded them, and he taught her to read from the English books in his small but cherished library. They became true partners in every sense, sharing both the hard work and the quiet, peaceful moments with equal grace and mutual respect. One particularly clear evening, as they sat together watching the first bright stars appear in the vast desert sky, Erica spoke with unusual softness. I used to believe that honor meant carrying the pain of those who came before us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm beginning to think that true honor might actually be in choosing not to pass that pain on to those who come after us. William nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him like cool, refreshing water after a long drought. Maybe that's what real forgiveness is. Not forgetting what happened in the past, but consciously choosing not to let those old wounds poison what happens next. The desert wind carried the first hint of coming winter, and somewhere in the distance, a lonely coyote sang its ancient song to the rising moon. William and Erica sat in comfortable, companionable silence, 2 wounded souls who had somehow found each other across the vast canyon of history and discovered that some bridges can only be built with patience, understanding, and time. They would marry the following spring, in a beautiful ceremony that honored both Apache and settler traditions with equal respect. William would learn to weave Erica's ancestral songs into his evening prayers, and Erica would plant a thriving garden where the hanging tree had stood, growing corn and beans and squash in soil that had known only sorrow and violence for far too long. And sometimes, when the desert wind blew just right, neighbors claimed they could hear the sound of laughter carried on the evening air, the joyful sound of 2 people who had consciously chosen love over legacy, healing over hurt, and discovered together that forgiveness doesn't erase the painful past, but it can definitely change the future, because in the end, the desert teaches us that life finds a way to bloom and flourish even in the harshest, most unforgiving places, if we're willing to plant seeds of kindness and understanding instead of stones of anger and resentment.